Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. This is Pastor Megan Rohrer. I am in San Francisco. I am a pastor at Grace Lutheran at www.gracesf.com. You can join us in person at 33rd and Ulloa every Sunday at 10:30 a.m.
Hi, I am Pastor Daniel Tisdale. I am at First Lutheran of Gypsum in Gypsum, Colorado, which is on the I-70 in the mountains between Vail and Glenwood Springs. We have one worship service on Sunday morning at 9 a.m. And you can reach us at First Lutheran of Gypsum, all one word, either on Facebook or on our website. Lots of stuff is going on, and yeah, come check us out.
Yeah, do that. And I've been hard at work doing volunteer trainings for the Women's March that is up and coming. If you're in the San Francisco area and want to do some volunteer trainings for that and learn about nonviolence, you can check out my Facebook site and learn more about those. Good work, everybody. Yeah, so today's Bible readings are a little interesting. Last week, if you watched the Bible study, I was really excited that we were going to read the Gospel of Mark for this year, and it's not the Gospel of Mark this week. And Dan and I like the Gospel of Mark the best. But Dan likes John a little bit, so that's one of the readings today.
I do like John. I don't know if this is my favorite part of John, but
yeah.
Yeah.
So the reading for today is like an obscure disciple or learner who is a part of Jesus's 12. It's a person named Nathaniel, whom in other Gospels, Jesus picks up disciples by like seemingly kind of randomly walking down to the ocean and being like, "Hey, you on the boat, come with me. We're going to do this thing." It's a little less random than that because Jesus was the rabbi of the town, and so he might have known people's characters and known what people did when they weren't hanging out on boats. And it's probably more about like the timing of God. Like the rabbi could have on Saturday after services been like, "Hey, do you want to work on this project with me?" But instead, the moment that the call arises, they jump out of the boat, leaving their dad in the boat to fend for himself, and they go follow Jesus. This story in John's gospel is pretty different than that. It's I think trying to demonstrate that like God knows everything and God's in charge of the universe and it's going to be amazing. It's linked together with Psalm 139, which is about God knowing you intimately. But Psalm 39 is really beautiful and really pretty and really cool in the way that it does it. And so I'm going to take a Psalm 139 departure and then we'll come back to John. So the way that Psalm 139 talks about God knowing you in every way is not omnipotence, which is this idea of God being all-knowing. It's not like God, the psychic palm reader, who is like, "I have a vision that you were near a palm tree once. It was amazing. Like, ooh, you blew my mind," which is the John text. It's more about God naming and claiming you, God knitting you in your mother's womb, God knowing every speck of bone in your body, God thinking of you more times than there are grains of sand. Can you tell I like Psalm 139? God just adoring you. And that means that God knows all the good stuff you've done, but also that God knows all the crap stuff that you've done, the stuff that might keep you awake at night that isn't a toothache. Sorry, Dan. But so God knows every part of your body and loves every part of your body, no matter how that shifts and changes throughout your life. So can you see how, as a trans pastor, Psalm 139, good stuff, right? It talks about us being wonderfully made. This is about God's intimate creation knowledge. Beautiful, awesome poetry, almost like a love poem to God in Psalm 139. John's calling of Nathaniel is more like that palm reading psychic mystery, and it reads a little boring to contemporary society because we have grown up with like mind readers on TV who like do wacky math formulas that figure out the day of Simon Cowell's first record based on a random number from someone in the audience at America's Got Talent, right? And we think of like mind readers and palm readers as people who are like predicting your fortune into the future, and they're going to know whether or not you get married and if you're going to have a good day today, if you're reading your astrology in the newspaper. And I'm not belittling any of the like ways of knowing and the sources that they come from for people across our planet. I think one of the profound experiences in my life was when I was in India, in Bali. There was a Hindu guru who does this weird math formula involving your birth date and like how many freckles you have on your forehead. That's not really what it is, but he has this weird math formula where he like watches your posture and like figures out what's going on in your life. And he gave me a list of 5 dates that would be significant for me, and told me that one of them would be the day that we would be told that we're getting our children. So one of the dates was the date that we got a call that we were getting our kids, and one of the dates was the date that our kids got adopted, right? So
wow.
I'm not like making fun of other ways of knowing, because they're not my ways of knowing and I don't understand them. People get to have lots of ways of knowing, but because we have this higher internet awareness of the ways that people can know information, like we can go doop, 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 dear Google, what was the War of 1812 and who cares about ships and why were they mad, right? We can do that, and then we can like learn things, and it's not prophetic. So yesterday, I posted a picture of myself on Instagram saying that I was having self-care during all of these busy meetings, because every once in a while I'll like post a picture and I'll be like, hey, you should do good things to yourself. I'm doing it. Yay, I'm a good role model. And you can't see like what else I'm doing. And so you don't know how much my self-care is, but it's like a pep talk, a self-care pep talk. So when I did that, it showed where I was in the city of San Francisco. And I posted it saying I needed self-care before a busy meeting. So do you know what happened? 2 minutes later, somebody from that meeting showed up to the location that they had just seen on Instagram with, wanting to talk to me about things for that meeting that I was trying to have self-care from. Legit, that happened. Don't take a picture on Fillmore Street. So we live in a world where we can find out where someone is right now. And very often, if you're like me and you have people in your inner circle who like follow your Facebook pictures, if you've ever forgotten that you posted a picture of something cool that happened, and then later you're like, I had this fun experience with my dog on the ocean and it was amazing. And then someone says, I know, I follow you on Instagram. You might not think that it's very exciting that Jesus is saying to Nathanael, earlier, you sat at the fig tree, right? It's not super impressive to me, because there's no specificity at all in this prediction of Jesus. When did was it yesterday? Was it today? I'm sure someday I sat near a fig tree, right? Is sitting near a fig tree weird? It doesn't seem weird to sit under a fig tree. That might be something people would do. But for Nathanael, it like blows his mind. He's like, you knew I sat under a fig tree? Oh, you must be God here on earth. That's amazing. How did you know I sat under a fig tree? And so this text seems very unimpressive. I might be missing all of the context that makes this miraculous, but it seems to me this text might be about how easy it is to dupe Nathanael. Like, I got some bridges I could sell Nathanael because those bridges know that he was under a fig tree yesterday. Right? So, you know, toss up. It's supposed to be a story about how God knows you super, super well, but it doesn't read very well in today's category. And it's a weird, I don't know, I think it's a weird text in a world where we know everything about each other. We know like what somebody had for lunch, and we know what their favorite new pants are, and we know what mood they're in, and we know it within 4 seconds. And we're so tempted to know more about what's going on in everyone's lives that we're tempted to even check it out while we're waiting at a stoplight because we have to just know what's happening. And so this is a very weird Bible text to read in our current society. What do you think, Dan?
I agree. That it's sort of a weird thing out of context. Because my audio sounds sort of weird on my end. Sorry. But I it's funny you mentioned that someone predicted to this is going to maybe sound weird to come from a pastor, but I think there's something to psychic phenomena, and a lot of that kind of stuff. Maybe not all of it. And the way I explain that personally for me is that all human life, or maybe all life, is connected somehow that we don't totally understand yet. And there are people that are more tapped into that connectedness than other people. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that there are people that, for lack of a better term, that there's some spiritual, deeper strength that some people have more of than other people, and they can tap into that way that we're all connected. And I think, to me, that's a justification of how prayer works and how faith works in a lot of ways. And if anybody was connected that way, Jesus was. The Son of God was connected that way. So, but I think that's something that is in all of us, as God is in all of us to a certain degree. So I do like the sort of how the different passages all. So normally through the lectionary, the lessons are all connected some way, and the connection here is that we're connected. Humanity is connected not just with each other but with God. And I agree with you that Psalm 139. It's about a God that knows our hearts, knows us deep down, and for the good and the bad and everything in between, and loves us so much. One of my favorite psalms too. I think that's my mother's favorite psalm. I was gonna say hi to my mother on this video.
Yeah, hi to Dan's mom. Thanks for the Christmas card.
I'm pretty sure that's her favorite psalm because it's such an intimate, caring God who just knows us so deeply and just loves us so much. So it's all about this connection, both with each other and with God. And I think that's one of the ways you can put a bottom line on what does it mean to be a church? What does it mean to be a person of faith? Is to continually work at connecting with other people, with the rest of humanity, with life, and to continue to work at connecting with God. Those two things, however that works, through preaching the gospel, through sharing communion, through having a cup of coffee with someone who doesn't even know you're a pastor, just just spreading the love and connecting with each other. That's what we're called to do. And it doesn't say that explicitly in any of these things, but that's sort of the underlying thing, is connecting with each other. I mean, that's what Jesus was doing. That's why Jesus didn't call the people that were the most influential necessarily, or the people in the best standing or anything. He called the people. I think part of the reason he called the disciples he called was because they needed to learn what it meant to be connected more than anybody else. Like they were some of the most broken people, and that doesn't mean that influential people are any more connected or any less broken. But after Jesus' time on earth, those people could speak from their own experience to say, look, before I was with Jesus, I didn't understand how the world was connected. I didn't understand how we were all connected to each other and to God, and I get it now. And so it was a real life experience for them to be able to share, and I think that's important. And I'm just going to transition into one of the lessons you didn't mention, because it's one of my favorites.
Daniel.
I love that's part of why I love this this passage in Samuel. It's the "Here I am, Lord" passage, and it's one of those ones that can be chosen for people when they get ordained or installed in churches. About, here I am called to be a pastor in the church.
I am Lord. Is
Exactly.
it I, Lord? The end.
And I can't say that I ever heard a voice calling me that woke me up and I wondered who it was like that. But there's something about that same connectedness between people and between us and God that breaks up our monotony and makes us have to do something. And I felt the ministry for over and it wasn't like this in Samuel, but it was just as strong. And I kept saying, not right now, God. But I think we have similar. It doesn't have to be a call to ministry in the ordained ministry sense, but I think we all have those calls, and it's what we do with it after the fact that is what's important. I think a lot of people ignore those calls. Oh, I've always thought that I'd be really good at blank, whatever blank is, garbage collector. It doesn't really matter. I've always thought I'm really good at blank, but I'm too busy doing this. Something has always drawn me to blank, and I don't know why. And everybody has that story. Like, everybody has that story. Either they followed that story or they didn't. And so that's what the whole idea of how we are connected to each other and how we are connected to God. All of these have that. And so I just love that, because plus it's sort of a fun story to read anyway. It's one of the stories that just sort of seems like so you can just visualize it happening. Poor Eli is just trying to sleep, and Samuel, said, "Did you call me? No, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep." Wakes up again. "Did you call me? No, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep." And finally, Eli says, "Look, it's not me. It's just God, probably. Just say, 'Here I am, Lord.'" And it's a neat story. It's such a visual, visceral kind of a story about how we're connected. So I love it.
I wish that the message God had for Samuel to listen to was a little bit better, because the message God wants to send is can you tell your dad that I'm going to be mad forever because he didn't make his kids stop saying trash about me, right? So I wish it was go forth, make peace among nations, feed the hungry. And it was dude, I hear you when you call my name and you're speaking bad about me and I'm pissed, right? So I kind of like Eli's response, which is well, if God thinks that's a good thing to do, then I suppose God can do it, right? Which, depending upon how you read it, if you read it kind of snarky, well, if that's what God thinks is good, right? Or it could be well, maybe I deserve that, right? Depends on the tone of voice you read that text with when you decide if Eli is being in an argument with God and saying, well, God, I think maybe you're more mature than that, and you don't need to just punish me forever. But, if you think that's good, then you just go right on ahead. Right?
That word "punish" in there is not one that I like to associate with God. But yeah, I do like this.
Well, because it's petty. It's not even something Eli did. It's Eli didn't make his kids stop saying bad things about God. As a parent, I would like my kids to stop saying the word poop every day, but good luck to me, right? They know not to say it outside the house, but every other sentence, because kids get really into stuff. And so, and I do, when my own kids will say JC or oh my G, I'll ask them not to say that. I'll say that's a word that we only use at church or when we're praying or when we're talking about God. And they'll go, oh, sorry, right? And it's a hard thing to do because they learn those phrases from other people. And how many people just say OMG and don't think about it? And I don't think, like, particularly because we're emboldened, like by Psalm 30 that says God's anger lasts a moment, God's love lasts forever. And by being Lutherans who think that God loves you enough and has saved you, and so you don't have to follow a particular set of rules. But what do we do with the fact that God was so mad people called him a name that they woke Samuel up to go wake up Eli to say, I'm going to be mad at you forever, right? And it's a weird thing to try to reconcile when we're trying to like rationalize what's going on. I like the idea about thinking about it like paying attention when you have a godly intuition, right? Like mother's intuition. I think you can have godly intuitions. Pastor Amanda and I probably connected the most through a class we took in seminary where we got to learn Reiki, and we got to kind of hone our intuition towards like healing and helping support people. And I think about that as like a type of prayer where you can really focus your attention fully on healing. And I do think there are ways that you can be attuned to different channels in the world. And it's a lot of work to just simply figure out if our job as Christians is what Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, if it is to, in each moment, assess what does God want me to do right now? And then in the next moment, and right now, like, what does God want me to do? What is God calling me to do? Not as a vocation that's like lifelong, but what does God want me to do? And I think truly and legitimately that there are people who are going to like balance the taxes, right? Jesus had a tax collector accountant dude in his group of 12. There are people who are to listen to the visions and who are to share with us stuff that's going on. There are people who are there to feed the hungry. There are people who are called to do all of these different tasks. There are people who are there to like fundraise, and people who are there to schmooze, and people who are there to mediate, and people who are there to help for this particular event. And then maybe aren't in the full life of one congregation, but they helped a lot in this moment of the congregation. And so our timing is very dependent upon what God is calling us to do, what our purpose in any given moment may shift. And here's the way that I would think about that is I don't write sermons before service. And that's partly because I have a small congregation and I have no idea who's going to show up on a given day, and it can fluctuate. So it could be someone who believes like this or someone who believes like this. And if I preach a sermon that's here, both sides miss out. But if I wait and see who shows up that day, I can preach a sermon that tries to speak to everyone who's in a pew that day. But imagine a pastor writes a sermon about joy in the Lord, about how if you pray, you get all the health you want, about trusting. And that morning in the narthex, someone comes in full of tears because they were just diagnosed with a cancer that's not treatable. Does that pastor still preach the sermon that says if you pray enough, God will heal you and all you have to do is trust? Depends on the pastor, right? But that's why this idea of discern what God wants you to do in every moment has to shift and has to change. When people thought Hillary Clinton was going to be elected president, their idea about how they were going to advocate in the world shifted once Donald Trump became the president. And I'm not saying which is better or which is worse, but you have to adapt and shift and change and be present in the moment. In the same way that a teacher with a lesson plan, like on the day of 9/11, is going to do something different, right? Or the day after 9/11 is going to do something different. And so we are people who are called to creative flexibility to be present to what is going on in any given moment. My guess is maybe, possibly, how Eli was in the world shifts after he knows God's mad. Like, for one thing, do you think Eli lets his kids talk smack about God anymore? Probably not, once you know God's pissed off. So pissed off, God would speak to you about it, right? And so I think there's some beauty in in the text in how it asks us to shift. On the other hand, God says, no matter how many burnt offerings you have, I ain't going to listen and I ain't going to change my mind because you talk smack about me and I don't care. Right? So Eli might shift, but we also don't know yet how God shifts later, right? If Eli changes, maybe God's position changes. And we know that to be true because of my favorite line in scripture, God changed God's mind. We know in Nineveh, in the book of Jonah, everybody was terrible. God was going to wipe them off the face of the earth. They were going to be dead. And then they had a change of their behavior and a change of their hearts, and God changes God's mind and saves them, even though God said, I ain't never going to save you, right? And by the way, since you might not know my kids, that's a reenactment of Michaela's tantrums. When she first arrived at our house, her catchphrase was, I'm never going to do it, right? So it's my version of God having the tantrum of a 3-year-old. I'm never going to save you, right? But just know that this one story that captures one moment of time of one bit of God's anger, if it's true, God's love lasts forever and God's anger lasts a moment, then we don't necessarily have to believe God that God's going to be mad forever about this.
Well, I also think that sometimes when you're in a position, sometimes it helps to go a little overboard, right? Like, I'm not sure that God didn't say, look, you're done forever, just to sort of, and oh, okay. And then God was like, okay, I got you there. You understood how important this is. Maybe not, I was just kidding, but
God does go overboard quite a bit in those
sometimes
scriptures.
we don't listen.
God's like, kill your firstborn son. You love me for sure. Kill your child that you've been waiting for 50 years, right? So we do know that God goes overboard. This is less overboard than God went earlier in the scriptures. So maybe God's calming down a little bit. I don't know.
I always like to think that God, I don't know that God changes, but God, how we view God changes. There's the whole argument about, well, that we have an angry God, an angry, vengeful God in the Old Testament, and we have this loving, peaceful God in the New Testament. And I look at people and I'm like, well, first of all, I don't agree with that anyway. I think there's
there too.
Lots of sort of vengeance in the New Testament. But I also think that part of what makes Jesus who he is that through Jesus, our hearts will change. And so when our hearts change, how we view God, how we hear God, maybe like this 1 Samuel passage, changes. I think it's our hearts that change, and not necessarily that. I mean, I think God can change God's mind, but I also think that there's something about how we listen to God, how we hear God, how we react to God's call in our lives, that changes, and then we have a God that is being more peaceful and loving when God, in a sense, didn't change, but how we view.
I think there's an interesting thing where it circles back around to that omnipotence question again. Does God know everything all the time? Because if God knows everything all the time, when God asks for something harsh and then maybe changes their mind later, then if God knew everything, then God did it because that would help us be better, right? We've heard the ways that kind of rhetoric sometimes can be super unhelpful and sometimes emotionally flatulent. Yeah. Because like, if it's a way to just release, it's good for you, right? It's not like real relationship to ever say that to someone like, oh yeah, it's great. That terrible thing happened to you. Hooray, right? God knew all along it was going to be fine. And that's a God who's tricking people on purpose so that you'll agree with God. And that's weird, right? Not necessarily kind and not necessarily good news. If God has this kind of like loving, creative partnership with us, then there are ways in which we can create things, I like to think, that surprise God, that give God awe, and make God like delighted in us, like in the same way that like all of a sudden you look and your kid's drawn this amazingly beautiful picture with crayons, and normally it's all like recycle bin material, right? But then all of a sudden you're like, what? You made that? You're amazing. Like, right? I feel like God has moments like that, and that it's an interacted, connected relationship, not a relationship of like, it's not chess. It's not like, I don't know, I'm going to win this game. And I don't think church ought to be like that either. I think it should be a place where we're able to authentically talk about what we think God is calling us to do, where we can admit when we're not certain, like, hey, I wanted to figure out what God wanted me to do today, and I super blew it, right? All I did was watch Netflix and chill. And maybe in the grand scheme of things, watching Netflix and chilling that day was God's plan, because then we didn't go do something else that was harmful. But we just can never know, because we don't know the end game, right? And most of Christian theology is about kind of this ends justifying the means. In the end, salvation will come. In the end, justice will come. And I think what's going on in the Bible is this kind of both-anded idea that, yes, for all the things that we can't figure out how to fix that are terrible and systemic, there is this sense that in the end, that will all get sorted out and the deck shuffled. But at the same time, there's this ever-flowing stream of time that is bringing justice now and demanding that we won't wait any longer for this justice to happen. And it's a confusing, perplexing, weird place to sit as a church and as faithful people, because it would be so much easier if there was just like, can you imagine if there was a book called Fire and Fury, and it was like, you know what I'm talking about, the new Donald Trump book?
Oh, yeah, I do.
It was an expose on what God was up to. Yeah. And it legit could prove its sources and say, here's the end game. Here's the plan. The plan is there's no plan, right? And now we know for certain God's like doing the best they can and making decisions on the fly. And maybe that day that we got cancer, we weren't the biggest emergency. And, you know, there were people over here that needed to be saved on a life raft because of oppression, right? Or maybe we find out in the Fire and Fury tell-all book that there's these competing ideas about how good and justice can happen in the world, and we keep sabotaging each other, right? We just keep sabotaging each other. All people trying to do our best, but we're sabotaging each other. But it would be really nice to know God's endgame. And we have some of those clues in the text. We have some of those clues in what Jesus is up to. But if we don't trust them and we don't believe them and we keep saying, yeah, but, then these ideas that the meek shall inherit the earth, the ideas that all who are hungry should be fed and that it's up to us to do it, this idea that we should go out and care for each other and connect to each other, this idea that we should ensure that good news is good news for all people is just a metaphor. And then that vision that Jesus shared doesn't ever really happen. And so I don't know what the right answer is to get people to trust God more. If I did, maybe my church would be full. But I do think there's a lot of trust issues in our world right now where we don't trust anybody. We don't trust that God could be in charge. We don't trust anyone who's in charge. We don't even trust the person at Starbucks to get our drink right. So you need to like micromanage as we walk down the line and look over the thing to make sure they're doing it exactly the way that we want it. And so how do we have faith in the world with no trust? Probably something we could write an entire book about. But it would just be something that I leave open for us to think about this week. And for you to think about as you like read these particular texts, like Nathaniel trusts Jesus because of this conversation about the fig tree. Wouldn't have worked on me. What would have worked on you? What would God have to say to you for you to trust? Samuel needs to hear it a lot of times in a row. Samuel doesn't want to listen. Samuel hears a voice speaking to him, and instead of saying, "What would you like?" he goes and asks other people what the voice said to him, right? And so Samuel's issue is he needed to listen, and then he needed to repeat back what he heard and share it with other people, and that was very hard for him. And so trust is something we all have to work on in various and different ways. And God's encouraging us to trust by saying, I already know all your shit. Like, there's nothing you can tell me. There's nothing you can say that I don't know already. I still love you and think about you more times than there are grains of sand on the earth, even if you think of me less times than grains of sand could fit in the palm of your hand, right? And so God is hoping for trust, and we are people who woefully don't know how to do it, but we're not alone in our not knowing how to do it. So
first of all, I want to, at some point, use that used emotionally. That's a good one. You sort of mentioned about how I think one of the things that is possibly most harmful to communities of faith, and it doesn't seem that way on the surface, is this idea that all our days to punch this ticket so that we can go to heaven, this thing that's going to happen later on. And so people don't always feel like justice right now is necessary. And what happens is justice becomes a thing just for me. If I've done enough just for me, it doesn't matter how I'm connected with anybody else. It's only about me, myself, and I doing the right things for me, myself, and I to get to this promised place later on. I think that's actually detrimental to who we are as people of faith, and it's detrimental to this idea that I said earlier about how we're all connected and how that connectedness is important. So I like kind of what you mentioned about. I like to preach that heaven is now. Mm-hmm. We don't know what God has in store for us in terms of that, but heaven is now, and we are capable of loving each other and taking care of each other now. And if we truly treated everyone the way that we wanted to be treated, the world would change overnight. That's part of what that connectedness is. And so I just did I told Megan about this already. I was in a writing thing for a Bible study that'll be used at a camp here in Colorado. And each of us got a day to sort of design and write the Bible study for the day. And mine was about humility. And I part of the thing that struck me about the text in the day was that our society gears us to be egotistical. It gears us to be win first, win at all costs. It's about me and nobody else. And some of what happens in our faith communities, some of what happens in Scripture is countercultural, and that's a good thing. And that's a good thing. This idea that we're all connected, we're all loved, and we need to live in community and care about each other, and maybe sometimes care about others ahead of even ourselves sometimes, is so not where our culture pushes us. But it's something that's sort of stressed in some of these things, that we are called to care for each other now. And we are called to love each other now, and we're called to understand our connection with God now. It's not some connection we're going to get later on when we're in heaven. It's a connection that needs to be strengthened and worked on right now, including our connection with each other. And I think this idea of heaven is some promised thing that we're going to go to later on. Whether or not that's true, if that's all we preach, it hurts us from trying to connect with each other and with God right now. Mm-hmm. And that's why I like the underlying theme of a lot of these. There's this, the Spirit holds us all together. Yeah. I would say there's this force, and I decided to just name it. There's this thing, but the Spirit holds us all together, and Jesus knew it. And God in our hearts and holds us together. And And that's something that we need to take advantage of now while we're here on earth.
Yeah.
Not at some point in the future. And that's, I think that's part of what's going on here. So,
you're here. Yeah, so why are you sitting here watching this Bible study? Go take advantage of God's love for you and all of that business.
Amen.
Yeah. And we'll see you next week. Thank you, everybody.